5 minutes after 8, this is Breakfast BBC Radio London, and as we've been discussing on the show, it's the morning after the government's big benefits announcement. So how are the plans to shake up welfare payments going down? Well, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has said the rising cost of sickness and disability benefits is devastating for public finances. But the government's reforms have faced criticism from Labour backbenchers, unions and charities who fear the changes could push more disabled people into poverty. Carol in Chalk Farm called us earlier. She said there is still a huge misunderstanding and stigma attached to welfare payments.
I never tell anyone my condition because it's sometimes like a hidden condition and it can come and go, but really severely in my case. And I never claimed before because I was embarrassed. I just tried to struggle along, but it affected my work. So there were times when I just couldn't work, but then I just lived on any savings I had. It can affect you in the workplace because there's not always a great understanding. A physical disability, obviously you can see it, whereas a mental health disability, there's negative connotations towards that. And to qualify for PIP, it was horrendous, the interview I had to go through. I got traumatized, and I don't use the word lightly. I could not actually speak the day after. And there's always a tiny minority who exploit the system, but they're a tiny minority.
Let's go to Lewisham. Ellen Clifford is from south of the river. She is from Disabled People Against Cuts and is the author of The War on Disabled People and, crucially, receives PIP. Ellen, thank you so much for joining us. Good morning. Give us your reaction, first off, to the news of the proposed benefits and welfare changes, and take me back to when it was broken and how you felt.
Well, I think it's true to say that disabled people across the country are feeling absolutely terrified about the future and what's going to happen. The scale of the cuts that we're about to see is worse than anything that we have faced, and we faced a lot up against the welfare reform agenda that was implemented from 2010 onwards. I think everyone, we were warned, there were leaks. We were aware of some of what was coming, but just to actually hear it there being stated in Parliament, I think was something else. And I think people are still reeling from that today.
Absolutely. I think they are. Can we talk about some of the changes and how they will impact on people?
Yeah, so with personal independence payment, they've made a lot of the fact that the government dropped plans to freeze PIP in line with inflation, but actually I think some of us think they dropped that as a performative measure to try and look like they'd decided to be a bit kinder at the end, and they never intended to do that all along. With personal independence payment, they are planning to tighten the eligibility criteria. So there are two parts to PIP. You can get it for either mobility issues or for care, and so it's the care component that they're looking to tighten up. And the way they're going to do that is that you're going to have to score 4 points in any of the daily living task areas in order to qualify.
Tell me,
it's
about
quite complicated. The assessment.
No, Ellen, no. Do you know what? I it's complicated, but I would really think that it'd help Londoners understand more if you explain to me what this point system is, because I'll be honest with you, I've never seen one of these bits of paper before. I know people that claim PIP. I know people that have been successful in getting past the bureaucracy and the paperwork of it. Tell us all about it. What do the points mean? And do they make prizes?
Yeah, there are lots of people who don't get past it because of the bureaucracy. It's a really difficult process. Like the caller said there, it can be very traumatic and harrowing. And the way it's done is that the form is broken down into questions about what support that you need with different areas. So it could be getting washed and dressed in the morning. It could be cooking and preparing food. There are also a section on continence, for example. There's one around medication and treatment, and if you need support to be able to do things like remember and take your medication and attend treatment sessions, and the more disabled you are, the idea is that the more points you get. The difficulty is, of course, that there are some people like myself who receive PIP with mental distress, and so we might not need physical support for someone to, actually come and hoist us out of bed and dress us. But on a really bad day, you can just be unable to move. For myself, if I'm on a very bad day, then the struggle in my head is just fighting this overwhelming urge to hurt myself or kill myself, and that takes all my energy, and I can't do things like get out of bed even if I need a drink or the toilet. And so that's, can end up huge levels of self-neglect. And I actually need someone who's able to prompt me, to break me out of the nightmares that I have, and to be able to prompt me to eat. Otherwise I won't eat, or I'll struggle to eat anything healthy. But what the government's saying is there are too many of us who are now getting the benefit, who have mental distress or who are neurodivergent. And so they want to change the point system so that we will effectively be barred from getting the benefit.
What happens now for people with PIP? What happens in the next few months for people with PIP, and how do they start to deal with this? How do they unravel and unpackage what the government has said? Because one day it's just going to stop, isn't it? And it's up to those people with PIP to have to fight again to get what is needed for them to live a basic life, to do their thing.
So it will, if the changes go through, then it will be a process of reassessments, and we'll gradually lose it as we're reassessed. But what I would say to people is not to feel hopeless, but to actually try and change this and make sure that these changes don't come in by especially contacting their MPs. I think what people need to be doing is pointing out information that the government's misrepresented. So, for example, spending on welfare itself is not rising. It hasn't risen. It's lower than it was a decade ago, and is not set to rise over the next 5 years. What has gone up is disability expenditure as a share of the welfare budget. But that's to do with factors such as the fact the state pension age has risen, so that people who would have started to be in the state pension category are now under the disability benefit expenditure. But also the reality of things such as we've got a lot of people with long COVID now. There's a lot of young people who've lived through the insecurity of austerity, no prospect of good jobs, for example. So I think that the government needs to get a grip on the causes of why there are rising levels of disability applications as well, because of the cost of living. A lot of people now use PIP not for the extra cost of disability like it's meant to be spent on, but because we can't afford to pay our bills and our essentials without it. But actually this idea that welfare spending is out of control isn't actually true, and I think that's quite problematic, and I think we need to be trying to expose what's happening, and that disabled people are essentially being picked on because the government is worried it's unpopular.
MPs will of course vote on the changes. What are you hoping for out of that?
We would like as many MPs as possible to stand up against the government and to vote against it. We think that people need to show that they're not going to tolerate this. I do believe the majority of people in society want a social security system that provides a genuine safety net for everybody who needs it. And this isn't a case of workers against, benefit scroungers. A lot of people need PIP in order to stay in employment. A lot of us couldn't stay in employment as disabled people, and the extra costs that can incur for us without it. So I think people need to take a stand, and if people are free on the 26th of March, there will be a protest by disabled people against cuts, meeting at Downing Street at 11 a.m. I think we need to make some noise and say that we won't tolerate this.
Very quickly, and I'm sorry, last question for you. I know I've kept you very long, but would a London waiting on these new changes be helpful, particularly as London is more expensive to live in?
It is more expensive. So I think that my fear as a disabled entrepreneur is this is going to make things even more difficult. But the proposals mean that a large number of people are just not going to qualify for the daily living component at all. So it wouldn't affect us having a waiting in that we wouldn't be getting the benefit anymore at all.
Ellen, I really, really appreciate your time. Very quickly, what does it mean for you now? What do you do personally? How do you move forward?
It's worrying for me on a personal level. Already I can't afford all of the essentials, but I want to make sure that people have hope and that at least we show that governments can't pick on disabled people and not face the consequences. So I think there's a lot of work ahead. We're also fighting the passage of the assisted suicide legislation in the House of Commons at the moment, which is also extremely frightening for disabled people who are starting to see a connection between the two. People can't help but think what happens if you take money away from severely disabled people, and this category includes terminally ill people, and then you give them the option of the state helping you to kill yourself. People feel terrified on that level about what the state's true intentions towards a section of the population who they're presenting as a burden is. But I think that my job, among other leaders in the activist community, is to show people that we can make change. When we come together, we force the government to do a U-turn over measures that would have been extremely cruel and hurt people on a huge scale before. For example, there have been U-turns over personal independence payment, proposals to cut it before. We need to bring people together and make sure that we're looking after each other. The most important thing at the moment, with people being worried about this, and it won't just be disabled people, it will be family members will be really fearing for the future as well. We need to make sure that we come together and we look after each other, and that we take action to stop this.
I just had a message in from Stuart talking about his situation. He said if you've never seen the forms, they are absolutely gobsmacking. The biggest issue we had was being assessed over the phone by non-medical people, simply asking questions with no breakdown of the question and often being very pushy with explanations. The call was 90 minutes long. It's tough. It's really, really tough. And Ellen, I wish you all the very best in your fight. And look, if we can ever do anything for you here on BBC Radio London, then don't hesitate to call in. You know, we are very much here for you. And we will push and we will fight and we will try and help where we can.
I appreciate that so much. Thank you.
Ellen, thank you so much. Ellen Clifford from Lewisham, from Disabled People Against Cuts, and author of The War on Disabled People.